Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another show in the continuing series, What It Means to be a Mason. My name is Arthur Richardson. I'm a past master of Setauket Lodge and a past District Deputy Grand Master of the Brockton 29th Masonic District. Tonight we are very pleased and feel privileged to have with us one of the foremost Masons in Massachusetts, Reverend Brother Oscar Guinn. Reverend Guinn is an ordained Methodist minister. He is one of the Grand Chaplains of the Grand Lodge of Massachusetts. He is the Grand Representative to the Grand Lodge of Prince Edward Island. Reverend Guinn belongs to many of the bodies in Freemasonry, among which is the Shriners, or Shrine Mason. Reverend Guinn is going to talk to us tonight about the Shriners Burn Center in Boston, and his talk is titled Oscar's Children. Reverend Guinn, very good to have you with us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Good to be here. Go. A number of years ago, after having been a preacher and attempting to preach for over 50 years, I decided I wanted to volunteer to do something that did not involve speaking. I'm proud of being a minister, always have been, but I decided I could do something else as well. And so I went in to see Salvatore Russo, at that time the superintendent of the Shriners Burns Hospital in Boston, and asked Dr. Russo if there was anything in the hospital that I might volunteer to do as a Shriner that did not involve speaking. That if they needed a minister, I was willing to do whatever I could, but I wanted to do something and not speak. He suggested being a guard. I did not know what that involved, so I asked him. Shriners Burns Hospital is just across the street from Massachusetts General Hospital. That is not the worst part of Boston, but it's not the best. And there have been many times in Shriners Burns Hospital when people would come in who were on drugs, who would steal money from parents as they were waiting while their children were in the operating room. And so they decided to put two Shriners on the front door wearing their fez who would help the receptionist to see that the right people came in and others were kept out. If someone came in who did not deserve to be there, we asked them to leave politely, and if they did not leave, the police came and assisted us. Many times we got to know the boys and girls who were there. I want to share with you tonight what some of these boys and girls taught me. As I said, I'm a minister. My father was a minister. My grandfather was a minister. And I thought I knew a little bit about faith and hope and love and courage. But these boys and girls were to teach me things that I never knew before. Let me use as the first example, Karen. Karen was a little girl about 6 or 7 years old. She and her brother Brian were flown in to us. They came from Indiana. Dad was a farmer. He was master of his lodge. Their mother was very active in the local church. They'd been out on the farm, and they came in one day and went into the basement of the house. Dad lit a stove. I don't know what happened, but the whole house was blown about 6 inches off its foundation. Mother upstairs was badly shaken up. Dad was so badly burned that he was flown to St. Louis, and there remained in convalescence for weeks and weeks and weeks. Karen and Brian, as I said, were flown here to Boston to us. When Karen and Brian came in, they immediately thought that Karen was the worst of the two, because Karen was burned over 80% of her body. At that time, very few children had ever lived after being burned 80 or 90% of their body. Brian did not look too bad. We found out later that Brian was probably the worst of the two, because Brian had inhaled so much smoke that he was brain damaged. The family tried to keep him at home. He's now had to be institutionalized because they could not care for him as they could or should have. Karen was the one that I got to know best. Karen used to come out to the house to see us. Sometimes her mother would come, sometimes her grandmother as well. I remember one Sunday afternoon after church and after dinner. We were sitting, my wife was on one side, Karen was on the other, and her mother was sitting off to the side. Karen kept looking at me. She called me Uncle Oscar. She'd keep looking and smiling. I don't know whether she knew what I was thinking or not. What I was thinking was looking at Karen, then a young teenager, because several years had gone by, a teenager who wanted to do everything any other teenager did. Wear shorts and play tennis, wear a bikini and go swimming, and yet Karen knew she could never do so. She always wore high-neck sweaters, long-sleeve sweaters, pantsuits, never dresses, because Karen knew what she looked like. I used to sit and look at this girl and imagine maybe Oscar had been burned like that. How would I react? What kind of courage would I have? What kind of hope would I have? Karen, I am sure, had down moments, times when she was discouraged, times when she may have wondered why in the world it happened to her. But you know, Karen never said this vocally to me. She never complained. She never asked me, Uncle Oscar, why did it happen to me? Why can't I do things like other girls? She moved ahead. And there were many, many times when I looked at her and I knew that maybe I didn't have that kind of courage. I didn't have that kind of hope. Yet all of you who are Shrine Masons helped to give her that hope by giving her encouragement and help physically, spiritually, and every other way at the Shriners Burns Hospital. The second child that I got to know very, very well was named Timmy. Timmy came from Long Island in New York State. I got to know Timmy when he was about 5 years old. When Timmy was 2, his house had caught on fire. He was the last one that they rescued. And when they got little Timmy out, Timmy had lost his right hand. He had lost his entire face. His nose was gone, his mouth, his ears. I don't know how he saved his eyes, but they were okay. And yet Timmy looked terrible. There's no other way I can describe it. The first time I met Timmy, I was sitting down at the front door in the Shriners Burns Hospital reading, and this little boy came up with his pajamas and with his night coat on. He came walking straight up to me and stuck out his little hand. I hope my face did not say what my mind was thinking, because I'd never seen a person without a face. I'd never seen a little 5-year-old without a face. And I almost just stuck my hand out to shake hands with him without thinking. And then I realized that he did not have a hand. It was only a stump. Most of the boys and girls in the hospital knew that I carried candy in my pocket. And the next question Timmy asked was, "Mister, do you have any candy tonight?" I said, "Timmy, I don't have any candy with me tonight." His next comment was, "There's a vending machine in the basement." And you know where we went. We went down to the basement. I got him some candy. We were able to talk. We stayed down quite a while. And then we came back up to the lobby. He later went off to bed. But just before he left, he turned to my pardon and me. He looked up in our face that wasn't there. And he said, "Mister, do you love God?" Ministers are very seldom speechless, but I was, because I didn't know what he was asking me. I knew I believed in God, but was Timmy really asking me that? Was he saying, "Look at me, look at my face"? Should I still believe in God after this happened to me? Or was he saying, "Mister, do you know about God? Would you tell me about him?" Or was he saying, "Mister, do you know about God? Because if you don't, I will tell you." I didn't know what Timmy meant. I didn't even know what he was asking. It was several years later that I found out. I was upstairs several weeks later with his mother. Timmy had had more surgery on his face. His mother turned to me and said, "You know, when Timmy got over his first surgery, was able to go out with people, we wanted him to go to church. When we went to the minister said, 'I'm sorry, I'll send a Sunday school teacher home, but I cannot let Timmy come to church because Timmy looks so bad, he would frighten other people.'" Timmy didn't even know I was a minister. He knew I was a Shriner because he could see the fez. Finally, I turned to him and I said, Timmy, why don't you go to my church? Several weeks later, we prepared for this. We sent in and picked up Timmy, brought him out to church. The Sunday before, I had told all of my boys and girls and people who Timmy was, what had happened to him. Most of them could accept it. One little boy began to cry and run away. One mother just couldn't take it and broke down. But Timmy came to church. He was accepted. In fact, some of the boys and girls even wanted him to go home with them to play. He had lunch with us, and then I took him back into the hospital. On Tuesday, Timmy called me. It almost makes you cry to think about it, because he called me up and he said, Uncle Oscar, they liked me at your church. They accepted me. Imagine wanting to be accepted so much and most people not accepting you. So Timmy then said, Uncle Oscar, I've got to come back again. And so Timmy did. When he was able and old enough to go to school, the school reacted in the same way. We can't allow him to come to school. We'll send tutors to the house, but they didn't want that. Timmy wanted to be with other people because he loves people. And so finally, they had to send lawyers down to force the school system to allow him to go to school. He did. And the first day he went to school, they sent him down to the psychiatrist's office. I have some very wonderful friends who are psychiatrists. I call upon them many times to help me in my pastoral counseling. But you know, there are many psychiatrists who need to see one. And this fellow in New York needed to see several, because he sat Timmy down. Remember how Timmy looks now. He sat him down and then turned to him and said, Timmy, how do you respond when you see somebody who is very, very, very ugly? What a stupid question to ask. Timmy knew how he looked. He knew what people felt when they saw him. But Timmy was ready, and he came back with a perfect answer. I try to do like God does. I look on the inside and not the outside. The psychiatrist then turned to him and said, what are you, one of these religious freaks? But you see, Timmy had a faith. And that's the question he asked me that night. Mister, do you know God? Because you see, he did. And he wanted to talk about God. He wanted to share God with us. His mother wrote not too long ago, Timmy is now an older boy. He's grown up. He almost comes up to my shoulder. He looks just about as bad as he ever did. But Timmy's got so much courage and so much faith and so much love for other people. His mother wrote and said, you know, Uncle Oscar, Timmy doesn't want us to give him an allowance. He buys candy wholesale. And then he goes out on the street to sell it from house to house. But then she added this paragraph. Every day, somebody calls the police and says, come over here and get this kid off my doorsteps. I don't want anybody looking like him around my house. But then his mother said, but Timmy doesn't stop. He keeps going. I don't know what Timmy will do when he gets to be a grown man. He will face many obstacles, many rejections. But Timmy has so much faith and so much courage, so much hope, that all of you who have helped to build Shriners Burns Hospital help to give him, that Timmy will make it, because he has it inside. The next young person I met was named Renee. Renee comes from Illinois. Renee was burned when she was a teenager. She was so badly burned that the governor of Illinois flew her to Boston in his own private jet. She came into the hospital completely swathed in bandages. There were little holes for her eyes, for her nose, and for her mouth. She could not speak. She could not move. She had been burned over 90% of her body. When they called me to come in, this time as a minister, Mother and Dad stood on one side of the bed and I on the other. She was under what we called a tent to keep everything sterile wherever she might be. There were little holes in the side of the tent in which we could stick our hands in if necessary. Timmy could only speak by our going down the alphabet, A, B, C, D, E, F. And when we came to the right letter, she'd shake her head just a little bit. We'd put that letter down, and then she'd spell out what she wanted us to know. She kept saying the same thing over and over and over. You can never imagine what that something was. She kept saying, touch me, touch me. She knew how she looked. She knew that it was difficult for her mother and dad and for any of us to accept her as she was. And she just wanted us to touch her. Because you see, to touch someone else means that you accept them. It happened in early December. In early December, I was preparing my Christmas message. And when I began to compare and think of things I could say, I began to think of Renee. How at Christmas time, God touches us. Friends touch us. Loved ones reach out and touch us by a Christmas card, by a present, by a handshake, by a hug, by a love, a kiss. And I began to think of Renee. And so I used her as the basis of my Christmas sermon, talking about reaching out and touching other people at this happy season. That Sunday afternoon, I went in to see Renee. She was lying in bed, and part of the bandages were gone, and she could talk very, very little, but could talk. She looked up at me and she said, "Did you preach this morning?" I said, "Yes." "Did your choir sing?" "Yes." "Did they sing Christmas songs?" "Yes." "Did you make a tape of it?" "Yes." "Could I hear it?" So I drove back out to Needham to pick it up. On the way back in, it dawned on me that most of that tape was my sermon about Renee. I asked her father whether he thought she could accept it. He thought she could. All of that week, Renee played the Christmas music. She also listened to my talking about touching each other and of touching Renee. You see, many people touched Renee's life, not only her parents, not only the wonderful doctors and nurses in the Shriners Burns Hospital, but all of the Masons who worked in there to help give her new hope. Renee wrote to me some time ago. She sent me pictures. Renee is now in her 20s. I must say that her pictures were horrible to look at. And yet Renee said something in her letter that made me stop and think. Renee said, "Uncle Oscar, I'm now on a hotline answering the telephone when boys and girls are considering suicide. I'm trying to talk them out of it, to give them a new meaning in life, a new purpose in life." Then I began to think back to when Renee first came in the hospital. I didn't tell you how she'd been burned, did I? She and her boyfriend were both on drugs at 14. They had worked out a mutual suicide pact. They soaked each other in kerosene, and he was to light her, and she then in turn was to light him. But she burned so fast and hurt so much she never lit him. Here was a teenager who wanted to end life, and yet through the tremendous suffering of operation after operation after operation, had come out with a new faith, a new meaning in life, and was using that faith and meaning to help other people as they face their challenges. The last girl that I want to share with you is a girl by the name of Bonnie. I was sitting at the desk one evening at Shriners Burns, and they said, "Oscar, would you mind going over to Logan to pick up a patient who's flying in from Brooklyn? Wear your fares, and she will recognize that." So I went to Logan. Sure enough, she came, got into the car. She was then about 16 years old. She was a real toughie. She was a girl who'd been raised a great deal on the street. She knew all the vocabulary, a vocabulary that I had never heard the equal of in all of my life, and I mean that. The first thing she said when she got in the car was, "Let's stop and get cigarettes. I'm old enough to smoke. I have permission." So we stopped and got cigarettes. And then all the way from Logan to the Shriners-Burns Hospital, which is about 15 minutes, maybe a little bit more in driving, she used a vocabulary list that I had never heard before. I didn't know she knew anybody in Boston. But as you know, Boston traffic, someone invariably cuts you off. And somebody cut directly in front of us. She rolled down the window in less than 2 seconds, told him all about his ancestry, and it wasn't complimentary either, with language that I would never dream a girl to know. We finally got closer and closer to the hospital. She turned to me and she said, "Never came here that I didn't cry." I said, "Why did you cry?" "I don't like to come here. It hurts. The operations hurt." Then when we drove up to the front door and I was to help her out, help her come into the hospital, then she turned to me and did something that I didn't expect. Certainly not as rough as she had been. She turned and she said, "Would you do something for me?" And I said, "You know I'd do it if I could." She said, "I'm going to surgery tomorrow, and I'm scared. Would you come and see me?" I never expected her to feel that way. And yet the next morning at 6 o'clock, I was in the hospital. She was getting ready to go off to the surgery. Bonnie was scared. She was worried. We talked together a moment, and then as they came to take her to the operating room, I turned to Bonnie and said, "Bonnie, I want to have a prayer with you." She looked frightened. I'm sure nobody had ever prayed for her before in her life. I said, "Honey, I'm going to hold your hands, and I'm going to pray, and God's going to help the doctors and nurses. They're going to help you. And after this operation, you're going to be better. You're going to be feeling better and be able to do more things." So I held her hands. We had a prayer together, and she went off to surgery. The next morning, I went in early again. She was still sedated, and I left sweetheart roses for her. 2 days later, she called, wanted to come out and see us. She still calls us after all of these years, calls us from Brooklyn, talks to my wife, talks to me, wants me to come down and see her family and meet her family. Even had her little sister to get on the telephone the last time to beg me to come. I don't know where this girl is going. I don't know how she'll face life, because she'll have a tough struggle. But somehow all of you who made it possible at Shriners-Burns Hospital, all of you Shrine Masons, have given her a new possibility in life, have given her a new hope in life. I still believe Bonnie will make it. I still believe that maybe, no, she won't accept all the ideas that you and I may have. She may not accept all the morals that you and I may have, but she'll make it. Because you see, Bonnie has something inside that's wonderful. These boys and girls taught Oscar what it meant to live, what it meant to suffer, and how to come through that suffering in a very special way. These boys and girls have faced more suffering than you and I will ever face in life, more than most people will ever even think about. And yet they've had so much courage, so much faith, so much hope, that somehow the love that they find in the Shriners-Burns Hospital because of all of you Shrine Masons has added something to their lives and also to my life. Because I'm a different person because I worked in there, and because they touched our lives more than we touched theirs. God bless you this night.
Thank you very much, Reverend Guinn. That was a very interesting talk. It points out to me that even in the worst of circumstances, it tends to bring out the best in people. We're very pleased to have you with us tonight, and I know that you had a very interesting earlier life, and I understand that your wife was born in China and that you have spent much time over there yourself. Could you tell us in a minute or so just what happened there?
Wish we had much longer time, because I was very active in masonry in China. And one of the things that really impressed me in my early years of masonry was to watch how Masons in China living under communism was able in some strange way and unusual ways to exert Masonic influence. We were not allowed to have any Masonic meetings after the communists took us. We were not allowed to have any kind of lodge meetings or anything else. But somehow the Masonic spirit still remained there. And in spite of the fact that communism was taboo, and we were able to transfer all of our lodges down to Hong Kong, which was then British, we were still able to have some kind of a fellowship, sub rosa you could even call it, while the communists were still in charge. Masonry can exist in many, many different places and in many different ways, and the Shriners Burns Hospital is the one that hit me most, that impressed me most. But I also saw this in China. I saw it in the Far East as well when I lived in Singapore and Malaysia and worked in masonry there.
Thank you very much for tuning in tonight, ladies and gentlemen. I know in the past we have shown many films on Freemasonry. This is, I believe, is the first time we've really had an outside speaker, and Reverend Guinn is a speaker of renown throughout the state of Massachusetts. Worshipful Fran Foster will be here again next week, as he is on vacation this week, and we're looking forward to doing more live interviews with people in the York Rite, other people in the Scottish Rite. We've already had the De Malay boys, and we're looking forward to interviewing with the Rainbow Girls. I wish that we could impress upon the people just exactly how much Freemasonry does in this country and indeed in the world. Masons in this country donate an average of $2 million per day to charity. We are the largest blood donor in the state of Massachusetts. Last year we donated some 22,000 pints of blood. We find a need and we fill it. And that is what Freemasonry is all about. Ladies and gentlemen, we thank you very much for tuning in, and God bless you, and we'll see you next time. Thank you very much.